Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you all hear me? Can you all see the screen? Okay. We spoke about كون قراءة القراء سبعة متواترة. There was 6 points that we said last week we will finish. We only mentioned 2 of them. Okay. The first 2 we spoke about. So we spoke about this one and also this one. Okay. So the plan, inshallah ta'ala, is to speak about the third, which is كون قراءة الثلاثة أحادا وما يلحق به. Remember we mentioned that the qira'at are, the qurra are 7, which are mutawatir by unanimous agreement. The scholars unanimously agree that the 7 are mutawatir. And we said the 7 are Nafi' wa ibn Kathir, wa Amr, ibn Amir, Asim, Hamza, and Kisa'i. We said those 7 qurra, those 7 reciters, their recitation, okay, their recitation is mutawatir by unanimous agreement. Scholars unanimously agree that their recitation is mutawatir. And mutawatir, I already said, it means mass transmission, multitude. Okay, it is what? It is mass transmission in multitude. Lakin, what about the other 3? The other 3 is where the dispute comes from. There's a khilaf amongst the scholars. What's the ruling regarding them? So who are these 3? And what are their names? You can write it down. Number 1, it's the qira'ah of Abu Ja'far al-Madani, and the second is Yaqub al-Hadrami, and number 3 is Khalaf al-Ashir. Khalaf al-Ashir. Khalaf is one time a Rawi and one of the times he's a Qari. Okay. Okay. Khalaf narrates from Hamza. He's one of the Hamza's ruwat. One of the 2 that took from Hamza. One of the 2 that took from him. He has his own qira'ah as well. Okay. So pay attention here. These 3, there's a khilaf amongst the scholars, as some of the scholars point out, that there is a khilaf amongst the scholars that these 10 are mutawatir. Okay. And some scholars, they consider it to be ahad. Ahad is anything that is not mass transmission. Okay. And from the scholars that believe that, who've stated that, is Al-Imam An-Nawawi. If you go to his kitab At-Tibyan fi Adabi Hamalat Al-Qur'an, Nawawi, he mentions, okay, in there that the qira'at of Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir, their recitation of the Quran, their qira'ah is ahad. It is not mutawatir. It's not mass transmission. But after him came Al-Imam Al-Jazari, okay? And in a few places of his book works, he stated that these three, يعني Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir, Jazari mentions, Ibn al-Jazari, he mentions that these three are also mutawatir. So what we say is the seven, which is Nafi' ibn Kathir, Abu Amr ibn Amir, Asim and Hamza al-Kisai, are mutawatir ijma'an. These seven, the seven I just mentioned, they are mass transmission by unanimous agreement. As for the other three, which is Abu Ja'far al-Badani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir, are also mutawatir. That is the strongest opinion, that they are mutawatir. But we say it is mutawatirun bil khilaf. يعني مع وجود الخلاف. It is mutawatir with there being a difference of opinion regarding it. يعني these three, Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir, are not agreed upon. They are not agreed upon its tawatur. If you want to study the seven qira'at I already mentioned to you, the seven, you can find it in the Kitab al-Shatibiyah. The Kitab al-Shatibiyah, Al-Imam al-Shatibiyah mentions the seven. But if you want to see the other three recitations, you go to the Kitab ad-Durrah. You go to the Durrah of Al-Imam al-Jazari. Those two, so this is the seven. Ibn al-Jazari added the three, it equals 10, and each is two. Yani from the 10, each of the reciters, they have two rawis. Yani Nafi' has two narrators that take from him, that Shatibi mentions. Also Ibn Kathir 2, Abu Amr 2, Ibn Amir 2, Asim 2, Hamza 2, and Kisai 2. Ibn al-Jazari did the same for Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir. He brought two narrators for them as well. But then what he did was, after that, he felt that each of those 10 reciters, they have more than two rawis. They have what? They have more than two rawis. And so he wrote his grand piece, Shatibi. He wrote the kitab At-Tayyibatu Nashr. Okay. This kitab Tayyibatu Nashr is a nadhr. Okay. It's a poetry, and it's originally taken from the kitab an-Nashr that Shatibi Ibn al-Jazari wrote. Okay. In there is the قراءات العشرة لكن بوجوه أكثر وأزيد. يعني he mentions يعني nearly 1,000 طريق. That's why he says فهي زهاء ألف طريق تجمعه. So the kitab, it has like 1,000 and so in there. So it's a grand piece. I saw someone ask a question. If it's mutawatir, then what is the khilaf based upon? The khilaf is based upon some of the scholars, when the qira'ah reached them, it didn't reach them mutawatir. So they assumed it's mutawatir. It didn't reach them mutawatir. So they assumed that it's not reached mutawatir to anybody. Okay? But then again, the qira'ah is what? It's mutawatir in and within itself. يعني has been transmitted by mass transmission, even if I've expanded on this even more. If you want to look into it, I know you to do it because this book to be a beginning. Okay, I can inshallah ta'ala point you towards a series which I did called The Preservation of the Quran, where I spoke about it in great detail. Also, a PDF has been done. A PDF was also done on it, which is English language. You could also, inshallah ta'ala, if you just email me, I can email you the PDF بإذن الكريم. So that's the third point that we want to talk about today, which is كون قراءة ثلاثة أحاد وما يلحق بها. يعني the three Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadhari min Khalaf al-Ashir, they are يعني متواتر according to the strongest opinion. Okay, but there is a difference of opinion which scholars do mention. Some scholars do mention that is to not. Okay. Okay. The fourth point I want to talk about is معرفة الشاذ من القراءات. يعني what is shadh from the qira'at? What does shadh mean? You tend to hear that. يعني what is shadh? Okay. In simple terms, الشاذ يعني القراءة, the recitation which is الشاذة, it's basically هي القراءة التي اختل فيها شرط من شروط صحة القراءة. In simple terms, قراءة الشاذة هي القراءة, it is the قراءة التي اختل, in which it lacks. Okay, it lacks. Okay, it's absent from it. شرط من شروط صحة القراءة, a condition from the conditions of the authentication of a recitation. And in order for a recitation to be authentic, in order for it to be a qira'ah which is accepted, there are conditions which we're going to talk about inshallah ta'ala. So the qira'ah shadha, it means that it's missing a condition from the conditions of the authentic qira'ah. Okay. Okay. An example would be the ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى in Surah Al-Layl, right? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Abi Darda, okay, as is in Bukhari and Muslim, Ibn Mas'ud and Abi Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, they used to recite it as وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى. They used to read it as وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى. Okay, where the ayah is وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى, they will recite it as وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى, for example. Now this opposes the qira'ah that was written on the Mus'haf of Uthman. It opposes one of the conditions, which we're going to touch on later. This qira'ah, even that though Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and also Abu Darda recited it, it's considered qira'ah shadda. The reason why is because it opposes لمخالفتها رسم المصحف. It opposes the Uthmani Mus'haf. Okay, someone asked a question. Please repeat the English translation of the statement. Which statement? Even the definition of shad. Yeah, okay. It means هي القراءة is any recitation التي اختل فيها. It's any recitation that lacks, okay, شرط من شروط صحة القراءة. It lacks the condition of an authentic recitation. Okay. So you don't need to worry now about what are the conditions of an authentic recitation. We will come to that inshallah ta'ala in the next point. But what it is that is this recitation that's been read by a companion or two, it lacks one of the conditions. And here we have وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى. And we have here in our mushaf today is وَمَا خَلَقَ, okay, الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. And as I already mentioned, Uthman radiallahu anhu, he selected and he chose and he picked radiallahu ta'ala anhu the last and final version of the Qur'an that came down on the Prophet. As we know, the Qur'an was being abrogated from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Things were being changed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, verses were being taken back, and etc. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Abi Darda's recitation, Uthman deliberately dismissed it. Okay, and he brought the recitation where Allah says, وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. Okay, so this qira'ah which says وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى, it opposes the Mus'haf of Uthman, which is one of the conditions that it shouldn't. Okay, because Uthman's Mus'haf was done by the elite companions. So Uthman radiallahu anhu made a committee, and in that committee there were noble companions that were sitting on the table and they were discussing. And Uthman radiallahu anhu was the qari as well, the reciter as well. Okay, he was a reciter. So they brought the recitation that they believed and they knew, they were certain was the final version of the Quran that was sent down on the Prophet ﷺ. They brought it all in that mushaf. Okay, and then they distributed those mushafs to those main cities. So anything that goes against the recitation of Uthman radiallahu anhu, what he wrote in that mushaf, is dismissed, whether the companion heard it from the Prophet ﷺ or not, because Uthman radiallahu anhu, his whole purpose was to bring the Muslims together on the final recitation, the accepted recitation. Okay, so the recitation that says وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى, we say it's a qira'ah shadda, which is weak. Why? If someone was to ask you, you say لِمُخَالَفَتِهَا رَسْمَ الْمُصْحَفِ, it opposes the Mus'haf of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Okay, because the Rasm of Uthman and all of the recitation, all of the Masahif Uthman radiallahu anhu sent, okay, none of them said وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to ask you guys a question. Okay, I want to ask you guys a question. The Masahif that Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu sent, were they all exactly the same? Did they all have the same Quran written in it? Or were there also differences in there as well? تفضل سيد.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
They were all different.
Okay. MashaAllah. Now, so Uthman radiallahu anhu, the masahif that he sent, there were differences. It's not accurate to say that they were all different, because they weren't all different. But yes, there were some differences in some of the masahif, and some didn't have it. Okay? And Uthman radiallahu anhu did that for a reason. Okay? He did that for a reason. Some of the masahif that he sent to some of the lands had different wordings in some of the masahif he sent to other lands. Why did he do that? Because, again, he has to look after the final version of the Qur'an. Uthman radiallahu anhu has to observe the final version of the Qur'an. So if he just if Uthman radiallahu anhu only sends one version of the Quran. Okay, he only sends what? He only sends one version of the Quran. Does that mean that the Prophet ﷺ would what? That the Prophet ﷺ's other recitations that he read as a final version will also be lost. But Uthman radiallahu anhu wants to unite the people as well. How does he do that? The way he does that is he writes in the masahif, where in different lands, he writes differences here or there. Okay? Here or there, and different lands. So when those masahif get brought together, there are places where there are differences. Okay, but those differences go back to the Prophet's recitation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those differences, they go back to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not differences that go back to the scribes who wrote it. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. So today, if we look at also what Uthman radiallahu anhu did was the harakat, okay, the harakat, the tashkil, okay, were not placed on there by Uthman radiallahu anhu. Uthman never wrote the dots, and he never wrote the harakat, as you would all know. Okay, brothers and sisters, are you all with me? Uthman radiallahu anhu never wrote the harakat. Uthman radiallahu anhu, when he wrote it, the harakat were not written. So the Arabs never used like the alif. So Malik in the Arabic language would always be written like that. Okay? Malik would always be written like that. Just like the word and the name Ar-Rahman, you find it's written like that. When there's a when it's actually recited like that. Okay? The Arabs don't, that's why in the Mus'haf today, if you look at it, you see that little alif there. You see that little alif there. Okay? Does that make sense? So Uthman radiallahu anhu left it like that. He wrote it with the skeleton, Maliki Yawmiddin. So you can read it as Malik, and also the Arabs don't write the alif, so you can also read it as Malik. So how would I know that I can read it as Malik and Malik? It goes back to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The person has to have taken this from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet read it as Malik and Malik. He read it both ways. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But then, what is the benefit of Uthman's Mus'haf? Uthman's Mus'haf is, does it allow me to recite it both ways? Yes, it does. So the Sahabi, he has the Quran from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Okay? So he has a Quran from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He took the Quran from the Prophet. But he wants to know, can he read it according to the Uthmanic Mus'haf? Because Uthmanic Mus'haf, when he went out, every Sahabi, what he heard from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is now restricted. It's restricted on the Uthmanic Mus'haf. So then the Uthmanic Mus'haf, when it's looked at, the Sahabi has to read it exactly the way that the Prophet the way that the Mus'haf of Uthman has. Okay? So Uthman's Mus'haf, the Prophet recited as Malik and Malik. The question here is, does it allow the way Uthman wrote the Mus'haf to read it both ways? Yes, it does. There's no problem with it. Another example is, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. ya, nu. Okay, I didn't write the dots here. Okay, I just wrote the skeleton, the skeleton of the word. Okay, just the letters. That's what I've written. This one, you can read it both ways. You can read it in the two different, because Uthman, when he sent it like that. The Sahabi, he heard this in two ways. He heard it as fa, ta, ba, ya, nu. He's heard it like that. So that's one recitation. There's another recitation that Sahabi has heard it, which is, I'm going to take off just the dots. If you, oh, sorry. I'm just going to take off the dots. Sorry, I didn't want this to happen. Fa, ta, ba, ya, nu. Okay, so you can read it as fa, ta, ba, ya, nu. You could also read it as sorry, I apologize, okay? Sorry. Something. Fa, ta, ba, ya, nu. صح? Take it off. That's one recitation. Okay, you can read it as fa, ta, tha, ba, tu. Can you do it? Can you recite it both ways? Because remember, Uthman, when he sent the Mus'haf, he didn't send it with the letters and the harakat. And the Sahabi heard it both ways from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Does the Uthmanic Mus'haf allow the Sahabi to read it in both ways? Yes, it does. It's in line with the Uthmanic Mus'haf now. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Now, inshallah ta'ala, I want to speak about the fifth point. We spoke about shad. We're now going to go into the fifth point, which is معرفة ما يقرأ به من القراءات. This is the fifth one, inshallah ta'ala. معرفة ما يقرأ من القراءات. What qira'ah are you allowed to read? So I'm going to go to the next page. What qira'ah are you allowed to read? Huh? Two things, inshallah ta'ala. What does he first of all mean? What is the qira'ah that cannot be read? He means أي لا يقرأ في الصلاة, in the prayer. أي لا يقرأ في الصلاة. Which is the recitation that cannot be recited in the prayer? The recitation that cannot be recited in the prayer, in simple terms, is the qira'ah which is غير متواترة. Any recitation that's not mutawatir, you can't read it in the prayer. صح? And we already mentioned there are two recitations which are mutawatir. What are they? قراءة السبعة, the recitation of the seven, and also the قراءة الثلاثة, and the qira'ah of the other three remaining, Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Yaqub al-Hadrami, and Khalaf al-Ashir, also are mutawatir. These seven are mutawatir what? Bil ijma'. okay, by unanimous agreement. And these three are also mutawatir يعني بالاستقراء. يعني after following up the proof, it becomes clear that these three are also mutawatir. So these 10, you are allowed to lead the salah in it. Okay? You can lead the salah with those 10. But there's 2 points I want to point out, inshallah ta'ala. There's 2 points I want to point out. Ahaduhuma, the first two the 2 points I want to point out is, brothers, there's something known as qira'atu. There's something known as qira'atu ahl al-balad. Okay, this is what I want to point out. There's a qira'ah known as qira'atu ahl al-balad, the qira'ah of the people of that land. A lot of the places when you go there today, it's also known as qira'atu al-amma. Scholars also call it qira'atu al-amma. Okay? So for example, if you go to a particular land and they recite with برواية حفص عن عاصم, okay, you should read with that recitation. You shouldn't recite the salah with another recitation. If the people of that land specifically pray their salah with Hafs and Asim, or if they pray their salah with Warsh and Nafi', and like that, if they do that, then you should recite the recitation of that land. Because the scholars, they mention al-aslu muwafaqatun nas. The asl is what? Muwafaqatun nas, to go in line with the people. Okay, don't cause confusion and issues to the people if they are not acquainted and they don't know this. Okay, but if there is a need for it, your people they are used to different recitations, your masjid is known, your area, locality, that's fine. Or you have students of knowledge that you lead, and they are they want to hear different recitations and etc. Then no problem. But if you're in a land where the people are general masses, ammatun nas, the people are ammatun nas, and they don't know that, to cause them confusion, it's a problem. And I remember I was in a place where that did happen one time, where the imam recited another recitation, and man, he got angry and said, "What is this? Why are you playing with the salah for?" And he said, "No, this is how the Quran came down." And then he said, "Oh, you're telling me there's 2 Qurans now. You're telling me there's 2 Qurans now." So it's good to be careful. Okay, you don't want to cause problems. It was mentioned in the tarjama, the biography of the Mufti Diyar al-Najdiyah, Al-Allamah Abdullah ibn AbdurRahman Hassan. They said that every single Salat al-Isha, every single night he will recite a riwayah, the riwayat al-Qira'at al-Sab'ah. From the 7 Qira'at, every single Salat al-Isha, he will recite a different. If you're of a level, and he was a mufti of his time, if you're at that level where people will respect you, regardless of however you read the Quran, people will respect you. They know your level of knowledge. They respect you in terms of your position. Even if you came to a particular land, you could read in different ways because people respect you. Araftum? People love you. They know you. They trust you. And so they will look at it as صح, mashallah, the Sheikh read some. The people will more be accepting than any other person, if that makes sense. Okay, if you're struggling with the Quran to read it properly in the first place, okay, and you're struggling to read the Quran, then you shouldn't go and just read with different qira'at, because you will confuse the people if they don't know it. They will assume that you got it wrong and they keep correcting you, and you're basically saying this is a different qira'ah. Okay, I remember my children, when I taught them about the different qira'at here and there, whenever they would read the Quran and they do a mistake, they would say to their mum, when I'm not there, they would say to her, "Oh, this is a different qira'ah." They would say it's a different qira'ah whenever they do a mistake when I'm not there. And I was then told, look, stop teaching these kids different recitations and different qira'at here and there, because they're using it as an excuse. They use it as an excuse to cover up their mistakes. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, inshallah ta'ala. The second point I want to point out, inshallah ta'ala, is which is a thani, is if you're in a salah now and you're leading a salah, okay, a lot of people, what they do is they combine recitations in the salah, which is something you shouldn't do. For example, you're in the salah and you say, Maliki yawmiddin, Maliki yawmiddin. You combine all of that. You're saying it, both of them, together. Okay? Outside the prayer, you can do that, no problem, to teach the people, no problem. But to do it whilst leading the salah, that's something you should stay away and avoid. Okay? Because what you're doing, and you find that a lot, a person would come to a particular word from the words in the Quran, okay? And there is differences باعتبار الأصول أو الفرش, okay? Which is something, inshallah, we're going to touch on. There's differences here and there. So what he does is, he comes to this different wording and he will recite it. Like, for example, وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. So the person will come to the وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ, and he will recite it in different ways. Yani, sometimes he will recite it with qasr, sometimes he will recite it with at-tawassut, sometimes he would recite it with at-tul. All of them, they are transmitted. So he will do that, for example, which is the qira'ah of warsh, those different ways. So this is, as the scholars mention, doing that in one recitation in the salah. They say this is abath la yajuz. So you're playing around, and it's not permissible, because the Prophet ﷺ, it wasn't transmitted from him that he recited all of the al-qasr, al-tawassut, and al-tul in one particular place like that, where he brought all of those different recitations like that. But if the person does it in different places, okay, then this, of course, is permissible, and it's considered to be from the as-sunanul mutanawwi'ah. It's considered like the different types of the sunnah, if that makes sense. Different types of sunnah. What do I mean? Someone wants to read one day, in salat, he wants to read the Aisha radiallahu anha, what was transmitted from her in the tashahhud, the way she used to read the tashahhud, the narration that came down from our mother Aisha, or that was transmitted, from our mother Aisha, in the way that the tashahhud is read. And then one day you want to do the other tashahhud, which is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's one. You can vary between it. Or dua ul-istiftah, when you're starting the prayer. There are different ways to do the opening of the salah. There are different things that you can recite, right? So the person wants to vary that. That's fine. That's no problem, because they're different places, okay? For example, also, someone, for example, recited Surah Al-Fatiha, and they recited it as what? Maliki yawmiddin, which is the qira'ah of Asim and also Kisa'i from the 7, right? Then the person came to the qira'ah of that same surah, okay, and they recited it as اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. They read it as a sin instead of a sad. So ihdina sad is a, so he doesn't. He says ihdina sirat. Sirat. He recites it as, which is the qira. The it's from Qumbul عن Ibn Kathir. It's Qumbul narrating from. Okay, with the sin, but different places. So Malik, the person recites it as yani Malik instead of Malik. He reads it as Malik, and that's Asim al-Kisai. But then he comes to Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, and instead of reading as a sad, he reads it as a what? The word as-Sirat, he reads it as a sin, which is Qumbul an Ibn Kathir. But Qumbul an Ibn Kathir recites it as what? Malik Yawmiddin, not Malik Yawmiddin. Can you do that? There's a difference of opinion on this issue. And that which seems apparent والعلم عند الله is في أصح القولين يجوز. That it's permissible for you to do that, because this is considered العمل بالسنن المتنوعة في مواضع مختلفة. It's different places that you're reciting. Malik is an ayah different, and another ayah you can recite it with another qira'ah if you want to. Okay. That's something important to remember, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. The sixth, inshallah ta'ala, point that I want to discuss today and speak about is the last point, which is the شروط صحة القراءة. Okay. The sixth one is شروط صحة القراءة القرآنية. Okay. What is that? I want us to talk about the conditions of a recitation to be accepted. Okay. Suyuti already mentions it here. He says وشرط القراءة. So you can go here. So he mentions it here. He says وشرط. Suyuti mentions here وشرط القرآن صحة السند وموافقة العربية والخط. So he mentions three conditions. Okay, he mentions what? Three conditions. Let me write those three conditions down. So we're going to call this شروط Al-Qur'an. The first of those conditions is أولها is what? صحة السند. الثاني is what? موافقة العربية. طيبة النشر. He says وكل ما هو القرآن فهذه الثلاثة الأركان وحيث ما يختل ركن أثبت شذوذه ولو كان في سبعة, something like that. So these are the three conditions. The first one is يعني it's صحيح, its chain is authentically transmitted. It's authentic, يعني it's transmitted authentically. Okay, it has an authentic chain of transmission. Okay, يعني باتصاله وثقة رجاله وضبطهم وشهرتهم. يعني for it to be authentically transmitted, there has to be 3 things in place. Okay, or 4 conditions. Connection of the narration. The narration's connection is connected. The reliable, the narrators, okay, and their integrity, the precision, the precision of the narrators. And the 4th condition, inshallah ta'ala, is shuhratihim. Yani it's famous, it's well known. Those are the 4 conditions. The 2nd condition is muwafaqat al-Arabiyyah. It has to be in line with the Arabic language. Okay, so it's in line with the qawaid, قواعد اللغة العربية, in line with the Arabic grammar. Okay, and last but not least, it's موافقة الخط here means موافقة رسم المصحف. It's in line with the mushaf. Okay, okay, it's in line with the Uthmani mushaf, which I already spoke about. So anything that doesn't meet those criteria is considered a qira'ah okay shadha. And the ones that never met those conditions, the qira'at that couldn't meet those conditions after looking at it, are 4, generally speaking. These 4 qira'at, they are considered to be the qira'at shadha. The one is Ibn Muhaysanin, the qira'at al-A'mash, also Al-Hasan al-Basri, sorry, and last but not least, Al-Yazidi. These 4 recitation is a qira'ah which is shadha. Okay, okay. Anyone have any questions? Generally speaking, yes. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Yes, the Prophet was taught all of these recitations, alayhi salatu wasalam. These recitations were taught to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam by Jibreel and Jibreel took it from Allah Azza wa Jalla. But some of them were abrogated. Some of them were abrogated. And some of them, of course, were not the Prophet's recitations. And the ones that weren't the Prophet's recitations are dismissed. And anything that doesn't meet the conditions are also shared. And now, Aisha's recitation of Salatul Wusta, Salatul Asri is also qira'ah which is shadda. By the way, it just means that it's not recited as a Quran, but of course it's used as a tafsir. It can be used as a tafsir, the qira'ah which is shadda. It can also be based on fiqh. Fiqh rulings can be taken from the qira'ah which is shadda. According to some scholars as well. By the way, there's some qira'at which are not shadda, which are not mutawatira, they are ahad. And we spoke about the ones which are ahad. Anyone have any more questions, inshallah ta'ala? Allah bless you guys. Okay, I'm going to let you guys all go, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, Salat Kitab al-Itqan by Suyuti, we could do that, inshallah ta'ala, after we finish maybe the Nuqaayah first, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.